Hey guys, I'm gonna do a video today, and this is gonna be a continuation on our study in the book of Hebrews, and this is going to cover chapter 2. And again, this study is viewed through the lens of eschatology, and specifically little season eschatology. The letter written to the Hebrew nation was a warning letter of things that were soon to come upon their generation, an impending judgment upon their Levitical priesthood, their temple, the world as they knew it. And to be ready for this, this is what the letter of the Hebrews is for. And let's look at the end of chapter 1 because it will reveal the context of chapter 2. And we're just going to look at the first 5 verses in chapter 2, but there's a lot to unpack in those 5 verses. So let's get started. So in verse 13 of chapter 1, it reads, "But to which of the angels said he at any time, Sit on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation?" So it begins to define the role of angels, that they're ministering spirits, and they're sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation. So there is a destruction coming, there is a judgment coming, but there's also a salvation coming. There's going to be a protection from that destruction, from that harm, that ruin, that loss of the world as they knew it during those last days for that generation, and specifically for the Jewish Hebrew nation. It's the Levitical priesthood, it's their temple system, it's the world as they knew it. They want the book of Hebrews is warning that there is a salvation from this judgment upon the house of Israel. And it is showing how to be saved from that loss, from that ruin, not to be part of that house of Israel, which is going to become desolate. So that brings us to the next chapter, and we'll read the first 5 verses, and then we'll go back and unpack it. So it reads, "Therefore we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him? God also bearing them witness, both with signs and wonders, and with divers miracles and gifts of the Holy Ghost, according to his own will. For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, whereof we speak." So this letter is speaking of a world to come, a new heavens and new earth, after this world as they knew it in these last days was soon to be judged, become desolate. And going back to verse 2, it gives an example of a word spoken by angels, that it was steadfast. What is this talking about? And that every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward. So I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this. I think one, that this word spoken by the angels was steadfast, and then that a transgression and disobedience received a punishment, which here a just recompense of reward, that it may have been referring to the angels that left their first estate, that came into the daughters of men, that made an oath with each other. This word spoken by angels that was steadfast, this oath, and they left their first estate and came into the daughters of men. But that serious transgression was judged harshly. And so if the angels who did this, who did not heed the law of God, how were the Hebrew nation going to escape this upcoming judgment if angelic beings can't escape it? And so let's look at it for a minute from that standpoint. And this brings me to who are the sons of God in Genesis 6. And I went back and forth for years about that. Is it angelic beings? Is it the sons of Seth? And after looking at it, I think it simply comes down to reading in context the first two verses of Genesis 6. And I think this obviously shows that it's angelic beings, the sons of God here. This is not talking of a specific group of men, say the sons of Seth or the sons of Cain, as that doctrine is taught in some churches. But in Genesis 6, 1 through 2, it reads, "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them." So this isn't speaking of specific groups of men. This is mankind in general. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to those men. So when daughters were born to mankind, that the sons of God, a new group being introduced in verse 2, saw the daughters of men, which was introduced in verse 1, simply as when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. It didn't say a specific group of men. This isn't speaking of the daughters of men as the daughters of Cain and the sons of God as the sons of Seth. This is speaking of mankind in general began to multiply. They had daughters, and in verse 2, a new group of beings, sons of God, saw that these daughters of mankind are men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So I believe that this is the sons of God, and this was a serious transgression. We hear this in the book of Enoch. It elaborates on this oath, this word that the fallen angels took before leaving their habitation, their first estate. And there's other verses in the Bible which parallels this, such as 2 Peter 2, 4 through 6. "For God spared not the angels that sinned," speaking of this transgression of coming unto the daughters of men, "but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment." So this is the just recompense of reward. This is the punishment of this transgression by these angelic beings. But it continues, "And spared not the old world, but saved Noah the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly." So we see several examples in 2 Peter 2 of judgments upon a sinful world. These, again, Peter was speaking to that generation about this judgment that was upcoming. He was giving examples through 2 Peter 2. In Jude 1, verses 6 and 7, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting change under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." So Hebrews 2, verse 2, when it speaks of these angels and this word that was steadfast, it could have been speaking of these angelic beings that made a pact, that made an oath, and left their first estate, left their own habitation, and came unto the daughters of men, that this transgression was seriously judged by God. But we can also look at it another way, and we can look at it from the viewpoint of this word that the angel spoke, that there was a just recompense of reward. We could look at that as Sodom and Gomorrah and the angelic beings that went into the city of Sodom to deliver Lot and his family, and the words of salvation that were spoken by them to leave the city, because there was going to be a judgment soon upon Sodom and Gomorrah. And it could be both, because this is a continuation of the book of Jude. In the very next verse, just like we saw in 2 Peter 2, it reads, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." So this word spoken by angels that was steadfast could have been speaking about these angelic beings that came to Lot and his family prior to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We read in Genesis 19:15, "And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. So this is a warning, just like the letter to the Hebrews is a warning for that generation. This word spoken by angels in Genesis 19:15 to Lot and his family was a warning that if you don't get out of the city, you're going to be consumed within the iniquity of the city. And in verse 17 of Genesis 19, and it came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad that he said, escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And it's no coincidence that Jesus in the Olivet Discourse tells that generation, when you see these signs coming, when you see the abomination of desolation set up in the holy place where it ought not, then flee to the mountains, get out of Judea and flee to the mountains, because there's going to be a judgment upon Jerusalem, upon your system, upon the Hebrew nation, Levitical priesthood, the temple, and ultimately the world as they knew it. And that's what happened. That's what happened at the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was destroyed. You can see the angelic beings with Lot and his family. But in Luke 17, it says, remember Lot's wife. This is Jesus speaking to that generation of an impending judgment. And he points back to Genesis 19 with this destruction that was upcoming. In Luke 17, verses 28 and 32, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Jesus is speaking of his second coming for that generation and of this impending judgment. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. So he's telling them, remember Genesis 19, remember that destruction, remember the angelic beings that came to Lot and his family, that heed the words of those steadfast words of angelic beings, of my words, of the disciples' words, of Paul's letters, of John's letters to the 7 churches, of this impending judgment to come upon your generation. Heed these words. Remember Lot's wife? She did not heed those words. She did not listen to the angels, but returned, and she was destroyed within the fire and brimstone that rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't be Lot's wife. And so going back to Hebrews 1:13, it makes a lot of sense now that the letter to the Hebrew nations is introducing angels, defining their roles and what they're going to be doing. Again, in Hebrews 1:13 and 14, but to which of the angels said he at any time, sit on my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? So heirs of salvation. This is a salvation from the destruction, from the desolation that was coming within the trumpet and vial judgments at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is what they were warning them for. And Jesus, again, warned that generation in the Olivet Discourse, as well as other places we just read in Luke 17, of this impending judgment that was coming, and they were warning them of it. In Matthew 24, verse 30 and 31, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So these ministering spirits are going to be ministering for them who are going to be heirs of salvation. They're going to be saved from this destruction. Those who heeded these warnings, those who placed their faith in the words of Jesus Christ and his disciples of these impending judgments, and to be ready for them and to do what they were supposed to be doing, to remain steadfast in during this time of tribulation and destruction. And it's no coincidence that later, as we'll go into the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews 13, it reads in verse 2, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." So these ministering spirits were part of this time for that generation. And as we see in Revelation 14:6, John describes their role again. It reads, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people." And I got a question the other day about if it reads that you will, when Jesus was speaking to his disciples and said, "You will not go through all the land of Israel till the Son of Man be come," then how did the gospel get preached into all nations? Well, first of all, the disciples had their role in that, the 12 disciples, but there was also other believers throughout that area and throughout the world that were spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. But prior to the destruction that was coming upon that generation, angelic beings, ministering spirits, had a role in preaching the everlasting gospel. That's the way it got out into all the world. As it reads here again in Revelation 14:6, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water." Ministering spirits had a role in preaching the everlasting gospel at this time of tribulation prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. God gave that generation every warning he could, of what was to come, and to be prepared. And if you were prepared and place your faith in the words of Jesus Christ, in his finished redemptive work, that you endured to the end of these trials and tribulations and remain steadfast in the faith, that you would be spared from this destruction. This was a fleshly destruction that was coming upon the flesh of that generation. It was a salvation of ruin and loss of the world as they knew it, of the destruction that was coming upon the house of Israel. And so now let's go to verse 3, where it reads, "How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him?" So now this letter is saying, all right, this great salvation is coming through Jesus Christ, and it was spoken to your generation through Jesus Christ prior to his death, burial, and resurrection. And it was confirmed by his disciples who preached the everlasting gospel to you and your generation. But not only that, but God also, bearing them witness, gave signs and wonders and divers miracles and gifts of the Holy Ghost according to his own will. You not only heard the everlasting gospel, you not only had ministering spirits come to your generation, but you also were witness to diverse miracles. God showed through signs and wonders of the salvation that was to come through Jesus Christ, and to place your faith in him. And so this salvation, which first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by them that heard him, God also bearing them witness, both with signs and wonders and diverse miracles. This is speaking of all the signs and wonders that that generation saw by Jesus, by his disciples. the healing of the blind. The deaf could hear. The lame could walk. And the raising of the dead. These all were signs and miracles for your generation of the salvation that was through the power of Christ. And to place your faith in Jesus Christ and keep your faith resting in Him and not in a Levitical priesthood, not in a house that was soon to be destroyed. As it reads in John 20, 30, and 31, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. And ending the chapter 2 verses that we're going to look at today, for unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, whereof we speak. So he is now speaking of a world to come after a destruction of the world that they knew at that time, and that they were going to be part of this world to come. They were going to be put in subjection. They were going to be rulers. They were going to be priests. They were going to reign with Christ during this new era, this new heavens and new earth that were coming after this destruction of the previous world as they knew it. This is speaking of the millennial reign of Christ. And Jesus, his disciples, and the letter of the Hebrews was warning of this upcoming judgment, but also giving them hope and remaining steadfast in their faith, because that through trials and tribulations, they were going to come through it. And on the other end, they were going to experience a millennial reign of Jesus Christ, a literal 1,000 years, and they were going to be part of this kingdom to come. So we'll conclude with that and look at chapter 3 in a video very soon, God willing. God bless.